Are you satisfied with your understanding of sustainability? If you are not, imagine a journey together, a pluralistic one, with academia, innovators, startups, NGOs, all looking for solutions to the greatest challenge of our time. My name is Samuele Tini, and this is the Sustainability Journey. Welcome to a new episode, and today we are going to discuss innovation. We're going to see incredible material, something that is always interested me, and we already discussed a bit. So we are here with Lauryn Menard, who is the founder of GoEarth. Thank you so much, Lauryn, for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. This will be fun.
And Lauryn, you have done a lot of design, regenerative materials. Now you are working with mycelium. But before that, our question, who is Lauryn? How your career has gone from fashion and materials to biomaterials?
Yeah, so it's a winding path, but I think most folks, that's the case, right? Very few people have a straight path in their career. But I grew up in the middle of the woods in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. That definitely kind of crafted the way that my brain works and made me care about the earth more than folks who maybe grew up in a city. I don't know, but that was my experience. And went directly into fashion school out of high school, and just realized that I wanted to solve bigger problems through design. So fast forward many years, I've worked through the worlds of footwear, fashion, furniture, industrial design, always in this realm of sustainable materials. And that's just been the constant throughout. So even if my resume looks confusing, the one thing that has remained the same is the fact that I've worked with sustainable materials.
And it's really important because, of course, our experience as humans is mediated by objects. Everything that we do is mediated by an object. And of course,
Right.
And we really need now to be more sustainable. Everything that we touch, I think 80 or 90%, it's plastic, horrible plastic coming from oil. So a recurring theme from your work is more responsible, mass manufactured future. So how did this vision translate in your first work at Proud? So your design for regenerative material?
Well, I had this moment when I was in a footwear factory in China. I had worked on a cycling shoe, and I saw tens of thousands of these coming down the conveyor belt, if you could visualize that. And there was a lot of plastic, a lot of materials that could never be taken apart and they'd have a very awful end of life. And I had this existential crisis in that moment, which led me to think that I needed to do better because my values weren't aligning with the things I was putting out into the world. So that led me to starting Prowl, a design agency with my friend and collaborator, Bailey. And that was the whole ethos of the studio. The studio is still up and functioning. It's just not my day-to-day anymore. It's very successful. It's doing great and doing really, really positive work. But the ethos there is when you're designing something, a lot of those decisions that affect a product's end of life happen in that concept phase. And so it's really important to begin the design process. We say begin with the end, right? Begin with the product's end of life at the beginning of the concept phase.
And what you said is really important because, of course, we go for the least cost combination, we go for the usual path. So in your work, and you have collaborated with big names in your resume and your work. So I want to ask, which were the biggest challenges to change and challenge the mentality there to go for more sustainable materials?
Well, I think most people want to do the right thing. They want to build products that are better for people and better for planet. I'd say that's probably true for the majority of people in business. However, when it comes down to brass tacks and costs, that's where it gets really difficult. And so what I realized in working from the inside before running an agency, the one thing that became very difficult was the projects that were quote unquote more sustainable usually ended up being these peacock products. So these like marketing moments where they only had to commit to making 100, 1,000, 10,000 of them, right? And then they could move on. It makes them look better. People remember that and not the bad things in that moment, right? So I'd say that's the biggest challenge is this crutch of, oh, this can just be a marketing story and a small little thing that we can keep moving. It doesn't become the standard. That was my biggest frustration.
That is really an important part because, of course, sometimes sustainability is a niche or a product product that is for the 0.1% high cost, but is not mass. How we can, if you can go just a bit deeper, how we can become like make sustainability and sustainability design and material mass production? How we change the way we do it things?
Yeah, I think it just needs to become the standard. I think it starts in education. As a professor, I really believe that we do not need to be teaching the ways of like virgin plastic anymore, right? I think it's just about replacing certain things with the newer, better versions of the old. People still need to learn how things are mass manufactured, like plastics. They're injection molded. There are all these different ways to manufacture with plastics. It's important to know those things because then you can use new materials in that machinery. But it's just a matter of reframing it as more responsible doesn't have to mean more expensive. It doesn't have to mean XYZ, that it has this reputation of being like, oh, it's going to like not last as long. It's going to whatever. You have to hold products to the same standards as conventional, I'll just say toxic products, right? They need to still function just as well, but we need to make sure that people aren't losing out on functionality. They're still having a good experience, but it's also good for the planet. Sometimes that means that the design process and R&D will take longer. That's just the reality. Americans don't like that. Europeans might like that a little bit more, right? Like, oh, the design process might take 6 months to a year longer. And that should be okay, right? Because if we're putting things out into the world that need to last a long time, it might take a while to make it. So, yeah.
And talking about material, it's really an important point that you made. And talking about material, now you have gone even a bit deeper. You are using now mycelium-based products and material, and especially with art, you have gone for something a bit unfamiliar, earplugs. So why that? And then if you can explain to some listener that might be lay people, not technical, why mycelium is so promising and important.
It's funny that you say something unfamiliar like earplugs, because when how this idea even came about. So my mom lost her hearing, and she now has to wear hearing aids. She cannot hear anything without them. My fiance is also in a hardcore band, so I use earplugs all the time to try and protect myself, longevity, but also very loud music. So I've been using them a lot, and I was looking for something more responsible, but I just couldn't find it because I knew that they were made out of PVC, which is one of the most toxic forms of carcinogenic plastics from petroleum. It's made with vinyl chloride. It's very toxic. And at the time I came up with that, I was deep in prowl land in the agency world of, trying to make more functional products for clients that are made out of better materials. But I still felt like a lot of the projects I was working on were luxury. Biomaterials are put in this like luxury space where they're like way too expensive for most people, and they're just not using the material usually where it has its most potential. And so when I looked at earplugs, I was looking for a foam that naturally dampens sound, that is compostable. And I had this really strict criteria. It had to be home compostable and had to be naturally sound dampening. And it just so happened that mycelium, which is the root structure of a mushroom is the flower, and mycelium is everything underground. There's a company called Innovating that was making foam out of this material, and it was 100% bio-based. And it just so happened that it worked. We tried it, and all of a sudden it was like, wow, this actually works. What a fun serendipitous moment. So that's how that came about. Some of it was a little bit lucky that material was ready to scale in this moment when we were building this business. Did they expect that their material would be turned into earplugs? Definitely not. But it's part of this like idea of just solving problems that aren't maybe sexy. Earplugs are not a sexy thing, but make it interesting, tell a cool story. And then the sustainability side can be like the second story, right? It's all about making things functional and accessible in my mind.
It's really interesting because it's often overlooked, but of course, I'm sure that people maybe they use for swimming or other, and then they've been thrown and thrown in the environment and horrible plastics. Have you got some numbers? Where are you now in your journey as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I officially went full time into Gob and stepped away from Prowl this past summer, but we founded the business. We founded Gob about a year ago. We raised our pre-seed round in August, and we are now preparing to launch and start shipping product by the end of next month in February, which is very exciting. We're already being road tested by a few of the world's largest pop stars, which feels very unreal. So on the B2B side of our business, we're cruising, we're building, things are going very well. And then on the direct to consumer side of things, we've mostly been making sure that people like it and doing a lot of product testing so that when we launch in February, we know that we're in a good place and people can trust us. So we're about a year in total. It wasn't until about last March that we had the material. And so you could say we've been moving very quickly.
Definitely, I can say that is a very good pace for a startup. And of course, I really like also in our journey to see, as you said, really what you said. I mean, there's not sexy thing like shoe or something that, but of course, a tangible problem that maybe is overlooked, but is there. And you are not just a practitioner now, a founder, but also an educator, no? The teaching biomaterial at the College of Art, California College of Art. So from that perspective, but also as a perspective from your work now, how do you see the most important developments, especially in your field for biomaterials? And how do you think this revolution can shape the way also we interact with things?
Yeah, well, so the course that I teach at California College of the Arts is in the graduate department and it's called biodesign. And all of my students get a chance to, well, we only send one student to this giant competition called the Biodesign Challenge, but all of my students, we vote at the end of the semester on their project and they move forward. And the whole premise of that competition is essentially the basis of the class, which is to solve very specific, serious problems with with biology, not necessarily new materials. And my students, every single semester, every single one of them invents a new material and make something out of it. It's insane. And the pace at which they work is like a startup. It's just unbelievable. There's a lot of failure involved. There's a lot of, functioning in the unknown, and it can be very intimidating for some, but some just embrace it, right? And it's their mentality, my students' mentality of, I want to do something with purpose to help people and planet with this new material that they, source from a place of waste, or, they find it somewhere and turn it into something. And I really do think it's them and their way of thinking that has caused me to take this sort of pivot in my career towards really trying to solve the less sexy problems and not make luxury products anymore and make something that is functional with a capital F. And so it's been really incredible. And I'm seeing more and more design students, they don't want to do things the traditional way. Biodesign is becoming the new standard to them. And they're all like, how do I become a biodesigner when they're about to graduate? And the answer is there isn't a path to it at all. You just have to carve your own path wherever you land. So it's been a fascinating experience. And although it's a lot of work while building a startup, I will always teach, I think.
And it's really an interesting one to see the ingenuity of young people and discovering new material. I'm curious now, can you share with us one or two things that really struck your attention coming up from your students?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll just say, like, one of my students who actually was the runner-up at the Biodesign Challenge a couple of years ago, her name is Sarah. She started looking at lemon and lemon waste from lemon juice manufacturing, from like any place that lemons are used. She did these tests where she would let the peels mold. She tried to burn it. She dried it. She blended it. She did everything she could with lemon, mixed it with a few ingredients. And then after about 100 experiments, created this really, really strong rubbery material. And in doing so, she making the material, she discovered that one nasty thing that hates lemons are mosquitoes. And so she created these mosquito nets for areas that struggle with malaria. And she created an actual net. It smelled like lemons, and it really worked. So I think that that's just a perfect example of helping people who need it with materials that are already available there.
Wow, and it's an interesting one. I mean, also having experience and having had malaria for 7 times in my life, it's such an interesting thing. So, and as well, I mean, for people that is not treated with a harmful chemical or other, it's totally natural material. Will be an interesting thing to try and test.
Totally.
And from your perspective, which do you think, looking ahead a bit, what is your vision for the future of sustainable material and products? Sometimes in the movement we say we are talking too much, but there is too little action. So what do you see maybe the next 5 or 10 years have in store for us?
My opinion on this is not a popular one, I don't think yet, because I think that people are really fatigued by just climate pledges and climate goals, and everyone's a little sick of hearing things in that way. And I really think it's going to be all progress. It will come from really, really strong storytelling. And what I mean by that is we can't have everyone claiming to be climate warriors and having a sustainable badge on a product, for example, or something that's been designed. It doesn't hold the same weight that it once did, right? And it really only attracts a very specific customer. I do believe that people just expect products to have that badge already, and that should be the new standard. And I think it'll come from having stories that go beyond just sustainability, right? So for me, for example, in marketing GOB, these mycelium-based earplugs, most people don't know what mycelium is, nor do they care, especially like different parts of the US, right? I live in San Francisco. We're kind of in a bubble. Most people consider themselves environmentalists, but middle America, maybe that's not true, or other parts of the world. And so it's important for us to also market the experience of the product, how functional it is, and just tell multiple stories, right? So I think that we're going to see more and more of that, where things that are more quote unquote sustainable maybe aren't marketed just as that, but are marketed as like having their own other story.
And it's really a point that also we discussed with another innovator a few episodes ago. Like sometimes sustainability product is marketed, even if it's not functional like a traditional product, you should buy because it's sustainable, but it's really, as you said, people are fatigued and sometimes it is not the right way. You get attract a niche or somebody, but some other people say, okay, let me do the other. So I really like that you are focused on functionality, and that will be the great shift that we need to do from just niche or nice to have, but really this is the standard and it where we go. And which if I can have the last two questions, the first one, where do you want to take GOB? Which are the next things apart of what you say that you are going now to start the production? How do you see your company in the next 5 to 10 years?
I love this question because this is where I like to keep my head is in the future. Well, first and foremost, we need to take over the earplug space. A crazy number. The world manufactures 40 billion PVC earplugs a year. That's like 5 times the number of plastic straws. It's an insane number because then when you start thinking about it, it's like, oh, they're used in military. They're used in factories, they're used for sleep, they're used for live events, right? You start thinking about it and it's like, oh, wow, it is much bigger than you might assume. So first and foremost, that's our main priority, but plan to expand into this category that we're calling personal protection, like really responsible single-use personal protection. So anything that might fall under that category that protects, you could imagine your skin, you could imagine sexual health, you could imagine different types of interpretations of what that means. And the way that we'll kind of go into our next product lines will be through feedback from our customers. So we're kind of going to we're just listening to people and what they want next, and then future based on that. So if we end up being the best product for sleep, for example, we'll probably really hone in on that category. So, but always under the umbrella of personal protection. And I just really hate single-use plastics more than anything. And that's primarily what we'll be focusing on disrupting.
And wow, I mean, it's a huge number. I never thought before meeting you that is a 40 billion.
It's nuts. Nuts.
And for our listeners that they say, wow, mycelium is important, whatever. I mean, Lauryn, which last message you want to give them? Which last maybe advice you want to give to our listener around the world to be maybe more sustainable?
Well, the way that I've always talked about this with my students is a lot of them will ask me, well, how do I do more? How do I get into this? How do I break in? And it seems very oversimplified, but the way that I usually describe it is, this is what I did. I looked at my skill set, which is design, industrial design and manufacturing. I looked at what bothers me the most, which is single-use plastic. And I combined my skills to help solve that problem. And when you wake up every morning, knowing that you're on that path and your skill sets are directly feeding your value system, it just helps you keep going and helps you feel like you have value and helps you just really feel good about the work you're doing. And in some ways, sometimes you might need to learn a new skill to do that, but I guarantee people have skills that can help push whatever it is that they care about most deeply. So that might be an oversimplified way to say it, but that's what keeps me going. That's usually how I describe it to my students.
Fantastic, Lauren. It's been a very insightful episode, and I really like also how you share your entrepreneurial journey in a difficult also setting, because of course we know that disrupting the way and changing the way we do things is not always easy. Thank you so much, Lauren, for being with us.
Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.